All right, this video is all about unemployment. So when we think about unemployment, unemployment is something that we really care about deeply. And in fact, if we look at how unemployment is characterized, it comes out monthly. So the unemployment rate comes out monthly in the jobs report. So we have the current population survey, and then we also have the unemployment rate coming out from the jobs reports. And those two numbers that come out of that, so we have the unemployment rate coming out, and then we also have the number of jobs created in a month. Those two numbers are, in fact, two of the most significant numbers that come available in macroeconomic data, and they happen every month. So on the first Friday of every month, the BLS, or the Bureau of Labor Statistics, gives us the unemployment rate and the number of jobs created per month. And really, like, if you watch talk shows on that morning before it's released, I think it's released like 9 o'clock Eastern time. So if you watch like the Today Show, before it comes out, they're going to have an economist on there saying that we think unemployment is going to tick down to this, or the jobs report number is going to be strong or quite strong or weak, relatively weak. And so the wording is very careful on that as well. And right after those numbers come out, you'll see the stock market actually go up or down because of those numbers. So the unemployment rate is something that's very important in our economy, and it's something that a lot of people pay attention to because it's just something that we can naturally see and that we understand very well. So to begin with, we want to understand, how do we measure the unemployment rate? And to do this, so when we think about measuring the unemployment rate, we really want to understand, what is it that we truly want to measure? So, for example, would we want a retired person to be counted in the unemployment rate? And intrinsically, I think most people would say, no, we don't want somebody who's retired to be counted in the unemployment rate. If they're choosing not to work, then they shouldn't be counted as unemployed. And the same thing goes if, okay, so what happens if we have a stay-at-home parent who decides not to take a job? Would they consider themselves unemployed? And the answer is no, they would not. So why should they be included in the unemployment rate? And then lastly, we also have people such as like full-time college students. So if you decide that you do not want to work during your tenure at college and that you would rather focus on your studies instead, do you consider yourself unemployed if you haven't been looking for a job, nor do you want a job? And the answer there is probably not. So we don't want those people to bias our unemployment rate. So the way that we measure the unemployment rate is we define unemployed, so someone who is unemployed, is somebody who is ready, willing, and able to work and is actively searching for a job. So it's someone without a job, but is actively searching for a job. And traditionally, when we say actively searching for a job, it means that they've looked for a job in the last 2 weeks or 4 weeks. So in the last month, have you applied for a job? And if the answer is yes, and you don't currently have a job, then you would be considered unemployed. So in this case, someone without a job, and we consider without a job meaning that they work 2 hours a week or less. So they can really be working 1 hour a week and looking for another job, and they would be considered unemployed as a technicality of how we calculate someone who's unemployed. The second section is obviously who's the opposite of someone who's unemployed, and that's going to be somebody who has a job. So we call them employed. Let me get that. So somebody who's currently working is going to be considered employed. And then, so now where do we fit in? What about people who are retired? What about people who are college students? What about people who are stay-at-home parents? Okay, well, we think of them as different because these people here currently have a job. These people don't have a job but want a job, and everyone else is kind of, we consider them not wanting a job. So these are two categories of people that we really consider, we want that to be part of our unemployment rate. Because everyone else who isn't wanting a job, we don't want to consider unemployed if they don't want one. So here, what we tend to do is we think of the unemployment rate as the percentage of the people who want a job but cannot find a job. So to do that, we have one more category, and we call that the labor force. And the labor force is going to be people who are ready, willing, and able to work. And we're considering among adults here. So when we say adults, we mean people who are 16 years or older. Okay? So people who are ready, willing, and able to work, if they're 16 and older, these are going to be the total people who want a job, right? Because if they're willing, able, and ready to work, that means that they probably want a job at that point. Okay? That also means that our labor force just consists of the people who are unemployed plus the people who are employed. Okay, because everyone else doesn't want a job or they're not ready, willing, or able to work at that point. Okay, so to calculate the unemployment rate, what we do is we just find the fraction of the labor force that can't find a job. Well, that's these people. So the unemployment rate is going to be equal to the people who are unemployed divided by the labor force. And then we multiply by 100 to get it into a percentage. So we think of the unemployment rate as a percentage. So what this is saying is, what is the percentage of people who cannot find a job out of everyone who is ready, willing, and able to work? Or another way to put it is, what is the percentage of people who cannot find a job out of everyone who wants a job? And that's how we define the unemployment rate. And I think this does a fairly adequate job of capturing things that we want it to, because obviously retired people are not going to be considered in the labor force. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you're not going to be considered in the labor force, and you're not going to be considered unemployed. So all those people who do not want a job are wiped clean of this, and we're just left with the number out of everyone who wants a job, how many of those people can't find a job. And I think that does a fairly good job of capturing what we wanted to capture. Okay, so with this number, we can also focus on one other thing, is we want to know, well, okay, so we can have two economies, let's say. One economy has one person who wants to find a job and can't find one, okay? And so that's like that one person wants a job but can't find one. In another economy, we have 10 million people, one of which wants to find a job but can't find one. Okay, so if we think about that, well, one economy has one person living in it, and that one person can't find a job. So their unemployment rate would be considered 100%. The one person in the labor force is unemployed, so 1 divided by 1 times 100 is 100%. In the other economy, we have 1 million people. One person is in the labor force, he is unemployed, so that economy's unemployment rate is 100% as well. However, the difference is one economy has close to 1 million people that isn't in the labor force, while the other economy has everyone in the labor force because it's one person. Okay, so the last number that we really use to go along with this is what we call the labor force participation rate. And the labor force participation rate is out of the fraction of the entire population, how many people are participating in the labor force. Okay, so here it's going to be equal to the labor force, or again, that's just people who are unemployed plus the people who are employed, divided by the adult population. And I think the numbers that they use is between 16 and 93 is considered the adult population in this case. And then we multiply by 100 to get it into a percentage. Okay, so between these two numbers, we can figure out a lot about the overall health of the economy. Okay, so consider the two cases that we use again. One person has one person in the labor force out of the entire, out of the entire million people. So here we would have 1 divided by 1 million times 100 is a very, very small percentage. And that means that overall, a very small fraction of people want to find a job, right? And even though that they have a 100% unemployment rate, it just is telling me that they don't have a lot of people who are actively involved in the labor force. And in this case, it would be 1 out of a million. In the other economy, one person lives in that entire economy, and he participates in the labor force. So that economy had a 100% labor or unemployment rate. And here, the adult population consists of one person who is also in the labor force. So we have 1 divided by 1 times 100 gives us 100% labor force participation rate. And hold on a second. All right, so between the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate, we can take what's going on in tandem between those two things, and they give us an overall sense of the health of the economy. However, the unemployment rate can be quite misleading. And traditionally, when I told you about the two numbers at the beginning of the video, that we look at the jobs reports, which is the number of new payrolls created in a month, and we look at the unemployment rate, a lot of people disregard the unemployment rate. So to give you an example, today, which is February 7th, this is the first Friday of February 2014, so the jobs report came out this morning. And in that jobs report, unemployment rate stayed at 6.6%, so the unemployment rate was unchanged. However, the economy added 113,000 new jobs in January 2014. However, that was a very bad number. So if we look at what was expected, most people predicted that about 181,000 jobs would have been added in January. And then when we found out the number was 113,000, it was a quite disappointing number. And to give an example of why, if we look at population growth, well, you're going to be entering the labor force in 2, 3, 4 years when you graduate. So when you graduate, you're going from not in the labor force to the labor force. And when that happens, if we're not creating enough jobs for you to enter, that means that you're not going to find a job. Okay, so the unemployment rate may be unchanged, but if we can't add enough jobs to keep up with population growth, or the people who are entering the labor force in that time period, then that just means that people are out of luck. And so that's one example of the unemployment rate can be misleading as well. So it does a good job of capturing things that we want it to capture, but at the same point it can be quite misleading. Another reason that the unemployment rate is misleading is it doesn't include discouraged workers. And discouraged workers are people who simply drop out of the labor force. So let me give you an example. Suppose that you've been unemployed and you've been actively searching for a job for 2 years without success. So a lot of people, after 2 years of not having success, they may decide to leave the labor force. And that means that they just stop looking for a job. So it's been 2 years since you've had a job and you've been applying maybe for 3 or 4 jobs a week for 2 years, and you haven't come up with any luck on finding a job. At that point, you may become what we call discouraged and simply stop looking for a job. When that happens, you stop actively searching for a job and drop out of the unemployment as considered unemployed, and you also drop out of the labor force. So that means that the unemployment rate would actually go down as people become discouraged. So in this most current recession, we look at like the median number of weeks that it takes you to find a job, and we found that it took on average before the recession, let's say it was something on the range of like 25 weeks was the median range. So on average, you could expect to be unemployed for about 25 weeks without a job. When the recession was at its peak, and currently, that median range is somewhere around the range of 50 weeks. So almost double the time frame that you would be considered unemployed. So the average person is now unemployed for about a year as compared to 6 months or 5 months, what it was before the recession. And that's troublesome. So a lot of people may become discouraged, and in fact, at the jobs report today, unemployment rate was unchanged, even though that we added more people who couldn't find a job to the economy. The reason that the unemployment rate was unchanged is probably because we had discouraged workers drop out of the labor force as well. So we're adding people to the labor force, but some of those people who are currently in the labor force dropped out and stopped looking for a job. So the unemployment rate remained unchanged, even though the economy wasn't healthy. Okay, and that gives you a sense. And then if you look at the Dow Jones average on today, what you would see is around 9 a.m. Eastern time, the Dow Jones actually dropped when the 113,000 jobs number came out. Okay, so with that, it gives us a good sense of what we're measuring when we calculate unemployment. So we mean something very specific, somebody who wants a job but can't find one. Okay, that means that they're actively searching for a job. And then when we calculate the unemployment rate, we only use people who want a job to calculate the unemployment rate, so the labor force. And it's the percentage of people who want a job but cannot find one is the unemployment rate. And then the last thing that we look at is a labor force participation rate, which is what percentage of people of the adult population are actively wanting a job. Okay, and so those two numbers tell us a lot. But they also hide some of the facts, so they don't tell us the number of new payrolls created every month, which is an important number, which a lot of companies and businesses pay more attention to than the unemployment rate. And then the second one is it doesn't include discouraged workers, and I think that's the main problem with the unemployment rate is discouraged workers really bias that rate downwards when it should be considered higher than it truly is. So if we considered discouraged workers in the unemployment rate, such as the jobs report today, it may be something along the lines of 10% of the population would take a job if they could find one. Okay. However, that means 4% of the population became discouraged, or 4% of the labor force were discouraged, and that's really quite worrisome.